with the extra credit, G. All right.
No extra credit.
I know. Look at this guy. All right, man.
I got my notes. Ready.
All right, brother. You know what? No, you don't have.
Been talking about this every day, so I'm excited about this. This is my kind of topic.
All right, brother. You know, I got a cue for you. Algebra, bro. Algebra.
I don't know. There's a note that we're waiting on from you, Phil. Right now, we're live?
Oh, we in there, you?
Oh, shoot, I didn't even know. What's today's mathematics? I didn't even realize. That's how we start an episode.
Here's my mathematics. So, I got this Nino Franco, right? Nino Franco. But it was given to me by Insecure, Issa Rae, Yvonne, the whole cast, and Insecure. Low Key Thirsty is their brand. So
look at that branding. That's great.
Like that.
Very dope.
But tonight, they gave me glasses and like bingo cards and wine and cheese and so. Yeah, I don't know. That was weird. It was weird.
Right.
I'm going for it. So that's my math.
What I'm Nick. I love it. My mathematics, as usual. I'm drinking my coveted kava. I got a lot of questions this week about my kava. I'll probably be doing a little video where I show people how to make it. Yeah. Last week's version was from Seven Onda, which is a health food store here in Atlanta. But this week, I got kava from Wakakan. It's a high-grade kava. It was tested. You want to make sure that if you're going to do kava, you got to get really high-quality kava because you don't want to fuck with the liver. But this kava has been tested. It's high quality. It's been tested by the University of the South Pacific. So, that's my mathematics for today. Kava.
High-grade kava.
High-grade. Original. Syrian kava.
How about you?
I'm about 2 glasses into this Jack Daniel's fruit punch, and today's herbal choice is Gorilla Glue. This is Gorilla Glue. Today's herbal choice.
That's left over from yesterday or what?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday I tried to do the 20 blunt challenge, and I got to about 11.
Oh my god. You did a virtual 420?
Yeah, we did a virtual 420, which was super cool. But yeah, at home, I tried to do the 20 blunt challenge. I just woke up an hour ago.
Well, gentlemen, for today's mathematics, I say.
It is.
No, in the future, you gotta teach us that kava toast too.
You got
the way they do it. Fiji.
Definitely, that'll be in a separate video.
Okay.
Make sure you check out
today. Super important day because we have a public speaker, an amazing author on the show. I was first introduced to him via his book Sacred Economics, which he talks about the gift economy. He has a couple other books that are in rotation with some of the fellas that I converse with about the ascent of humanity, climate, which is a news story. So he has a framework that is unorthodox and in some ways a very futurist approach to how we can move forward as humanity. But today we brought him on specifically to talk about a 20-page essay that has set the internet on storm. He's a very busy man because of this specific essay, and we would love to bring him on. It's called The Coronation, and I'm going to read from it before we bring on Charles, not to be confused with Einstein, Charles Eisenstein. So the quote of the day is, "There is an alternative to the paradise of perfect control that our civilization has so long pursued, and that recedes as fast as our progress, like a mirage on the horizon." Ladies and gentlemen, bring onto the stage the one and only Charles Eisenstein.
There it is.
Hey, everybody.
Charles, how you doing, man?
What up? What up? What up?
Thank you for joining us, man. Like I said, I know that you are in regular times you'd be running around, but I know you're probably clicking around to different interviews, and everybody wants to get a hold on you. What's the response been like for the Coronation so far?
Yeah, it totally went viral. I wasn't expecting something that long to go viral, but I guess it struck a chord. And yeah, now I'm on, a lot of podcasts and things, and I'm I don't know, I'm starting to forget that human beings actually aren't normally enclosed in squares because I'm on Skype and Zoom and stuff so much. So let's not forget that. But yeah, that's what's been happening.
Well, I think that one thing that you talked about in the Coronation was this idea of creating an alternative. I'm really outside on a porch. This is a real deal. This is real uncle shit, just so you know, Charles. But you talked about creating an alternative reality. And I felt like you spoke to the agency that we have as citizens, but just purely as human beings. So I want to start there in terms of what you see as our role as just individual human beings right now.
Yeah, I could say a lot. I guess I'm not sure where to begin. A lot of people are talking about how coronavirus has given us kind of a reset, or the way I put it, it's interrupted normal. And it's kind of almost like a rehab intervention where we, like as a society and maybe as individuals, a lot of us were stuck in a routine, stuck in a pattern. Maybe it's just our own personal pattern, or maybe it's what has been necessitated and demanded by external circumstances, the need to make a living or the need to pay the mortgage or whatever is compelling us to act in a certain way. And now all of a sudden, normal has dissolved, and it can be really disorienting. And it asks us, since we're not stuck in the pattern anymore, because a pattern is dissolved, it asks us, okay, what do you do? Who do you want to be? And if we have a chance to go back to normal, do we really want to go back to normal? Was the world really going in the right direction before coronavirus happened? What about ecological destruction? What about social injustice? What about concentration of wealth? What about anxiety, suicide, depression, autoimmunity, imperialism? I mean, everything. Like, wow, we're liberated from normal now. And if we can reclaim and embrace our power, maybe we could take a different path than the one we've been on. So that's like one little piece of what I've been thinking about and what might be available.
We hear you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is fundamentally different about, like, what you're saying is so true as far as, do we really want to go back to normal? What do you think is so, I guess, I don't want to use the word unique, but is there anything unique about this specific virus that has exposed so much in such a short amount of time? Like, it very quickly, for anyone who kind of thinks wide and is able to kind of look at it from a wide perspective, it just seems like something about this one specifically. And you gave examples of, there being tons of other, viruses that are ever current in our just everyday life. What do you think is so specific about this one that caused this reaction?
Yeah, it's showing us a little bit about who we are, and exposing beliefs and values that were hidden, and bringing things to the surface. It's flushing things to the surface that we might not have recognized otherwise. Like a lot of people, here we are in this crucible. You can't escape your partner or your family or something, or your housemates. Excuse me. So before lockdown happened, you could go out somewhere and you weren't in this pressure cooker. So that pressure cooker flushes things to the surface. But also on a social and political level, like I think what you're referring to is in the essay I mentioned, something like 5 million children globally die every year of hunger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's 10 times more than are going to die of COVID-19, probably. 20 times more than have died so far. More than that, actually. But no one was ever in an uproar about that. There was no state of emergency declared. Nobody was like, oh my God, 5 million children are dying every year. 50 million are stunted or wasted. We can't go on like this. We've got to change everything. Like, there was nothing like that. We took that as normal, just as we kind of took as normal the rise of autoimmune diseases, the rise of addiction, depression. Like, things weren't working, but we didn't get alarmed about it. Not to mention whatever climate change, ecological destruction, the drift toward totalitarianism, political oppression, et cetera, nuclear Armageddon. Like, we just kind of allowed that to slide. And so I'm asking why? What's so special about this that allows us to mobilize and make these radical changes? And I think one thing is there's like a certain comfort in the problem being a virus, something that you can identify as the enemy, and therefore you know what to do. Because no one knows what to do when we're talking about domestic violence or addiction. There's not an enemy to fight. You can't conquer something. And our society is good at exerting dominance over the other. That's the basic template. And so here comes coronavirus, and now we can exert control and feel that we know what to do. That's the pattern that pervades this civilization. Find the bad guy and dominate, kill, destroy, imprison, control the bad guy, problem solved. And that's always an illusion, or almost always an illusion. I mean, sometimes the problem actually is a bad guy, but usually, like, just to take the example of crime, the idea is, oh, okay, crime, what's the bad guy? It's the criminal. What's the solution? Lock up the criminal. Problem solved. But what happens then is that you ignore the question, well, why are there so many criminals?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
What are the conditions that breed that level of desperation and trauma that create crime to begin with? And those are uncomfortable questions to ask, especially if you're benefiting from those conditions, So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So
you bring up a really good analogy about the fish, actually. Right.
Nice.
And the idea that, like, Western medicine and kind of how we perceive things would say that, if the fish is sick, let's isolate the fish. Right. And you talk about this idea of isolation just as a cultural phenomenon that we embrace kind of here in the West anyway. Right. And treating problems kind of in vacuums, if you will. And then, but that's one way of looking at it. And then you kind of made a parallel with, other cultures or other ways of thinking where it's like, if the fish is sick, what's causing the fish to be sick? We need to fix the tank, right? It's what are the actual factors, right? You also bring up another one where you kind of go into the whack the weeds theory, right? It's this idea of we're just going to whack the weeds until, the weeds go away without actually delving into the soil. And I think you make a great point in terms of when we look at, these kind of moments, when we have clear enemies, it's easy to galvanize people. It's easy to take action. It's easy to rally the troops and, and kind of take radical extremes. My question is, once this, we return, I won't even say return, but once a new normal is embraced, after COVID. And let's say now we're returning to societal issues that are actually more internal, right? We can't necessarily point to an outside enemy. And, you bring up some issues like homelessness. You bring up issues like addiction.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to identifying almost the enemy within, what are your thoughts about being able to, instead of just always looking for an external enemy, to actually be able to find the enemies within?
Yeah, I think that to find the enemy within is part of the same pattern that I would like to see us get away from. Because the war on the self mirrors the war on the other, mirrors the war on nature. Whereas, and it doesn't bring the result that it brings is more war. War creates the conditions for more war. You bomb the terrorists, you create conditions for even more terrorism. You fight. Anyone who's been an addict or an alcoholic knows you cannot heal your addiction by trying even harder to control yourself, by going to war against this bad part of you. Instead, you got to ask the same question I said with crime, like, what are the conditions for the addiction? What need is unmet that I'm substituting with addiction? So if I'm lonely, or if I'm in pain, then I'm maybe overeating or using some substance to feel better, then exercising willpower to stop isn't going to help if the basic need is unmet. So
something you said, and you just even kind of spoke about it now, and you'll see you're seeing, I think, because we don't have any other thing to compare it to, especially as adults, but you're seeing a lot of adults compare this to like jail. They're saying like they feel like they're in jail, which clearly this is nothing compared to actual jail. But there was a quote or a piece of the article that really stood out to me, where you were basically saying that isolation halts life. Yeah. And that health is basically community.
Yes.
Should we even be calling this the new normal, or should we be calling this the new, I don't even like, I feel like we should remove the word normal, because clearly, if you're thinking why, you're seeing that the normal is just being exposed to be rotting.
Yes. Yeah. So it's not so much like jail, it's more like house arrest. And it's not a new normal, it's actually an intensification of the old normal. Because it's not just with COVID that more and more of life has moved indoors, that community has been disintegrating, that our interactions have been more and more online, that you don't see children playing outside as much anymore, that the government is telling us where to be and what to do and surveilling us all the time. Like, all of the responses are continuations of existing trends, which it's like showing us our future. It's showing us the future that's going to happen if we don't exercise some intentionality and some will to choose something different. And so where it's been taking us, where we've been going, is toward more and more separation, with this idea that paradise or health or freedom somehow means that you're no longer in dependency and in relationship to the world. The idea that the way to be perfectly healthy would be to totally insulate yourself from every bad thing. But actually, as you were saying, life is about relationship, and health comes through social and even biological relationships, like even getting your hands dirty, getting germs in your system that challenge your immune system and that build your immune system. And health is a constant interchange and communication. It's not isolation. And I hope that when we see through this crisis where we've been headed, we can say, hold on a minute. We really want a future where we never hug, shake hands, or high five again, where we never have concerts and parties again, where we never have dances again. Really? Just so we can be a little more safe? what are we making sacred here? Is it risk minimization and the prolonging of life? Is that what is sacred to us? Or could we choose something else? To live fully, to hold life sacred, not survival sacred. That's the crossroads.
To hold life sacred.
Absolutely.
And not survival sacred. I love in the essay when you refer to this as an initiation. You wrote, this phenomenon follows the template of initiation. Separation from normality, followed by a dilemma, a breakdown or ordeal, followed by reintegration and celebration. Can you speak to how you feel? Because what I'm getting from that is like we're in a ritual right now. And in ritual theory, the liminal state is that middle state, that trance, that trip, where you do have to overcome or see the deity or have some sort of revelation before you can actually reintegrate into a new world. I think that struck me because I was feeling something that felt like a spiritual cosmic shift. But you calling it this kind of global initiation, I think it can be very powerful for human beings to even look at it that way versus like, oh, this is these are some days off, or this is a hard time, or this is a recession. That's to your point. Those are all different frameworks. If we go by that framework, we will go back to where we already were heading to. But if you look at it as an initiation, it feels like there's choice after the epiphany.
Yes. Yeah, because another way to look at an initiation is it's an event that brings a new truth into visibility. It faces you with something true that you weren't aware of before. And when you bring that into your being, when you incorporate that, then who you are changes. Your choices change. You become a different person when you see something you hadn't been seeing before and when you really take it in. And I believe that this crisis is doing that for a lot of people as individuals and maybe for society as a whole. What are we going to choose from that new incorporation? Maybe that's up for us to decide. Like, that's why I called it the Coronation, because it's a specific initiation into sovereignty so that we're not any longer just following instructions and capitulating to what we think is inevitable, what can't change. We're like, hold on. If we can make such a big change almost overnight, what else could we do? Like, we have a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package, most of which going to, corporations and banks, right? But still, right. A few months ago, everyone would have said, well, I couldn't afford a multi-trillion-dollar anything. And now we're doing it. So obviously we could afford it if we only thought it was important enough. And calls to say, well, what else could we afford? What else can we create? We can do whatever we want if we seize the moment, if we accept that power. Yeah.
On the topic of economy, right? I feel like America is having to have reckoning with itself in this moment, right? Like, even just looking at like the idea of like, the conversation around rent forgiveness, or the conversation around, the PPP, and everyone's applying for these loans, and it may be a grant, but it may be a loan if it's, these circumstances. It's almost like, America is kind of waiting to kind of see how things play out before it takes like a hard stance on how it's going to move forward as an economy. You've written another book called Sacred Economics, where I know you talk about new economy and also the idea of gift economy. But can you elaborate on the idea of like this, gift economy, and how kind of right now in this moment with COVID, how it might be an opportunity to embrace looking at the economy in new and in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's, another thing that's happening with COVID is that the inconceivable is now on the table for discussion, like universal basic income, for example, and debt forgiveness or debt cancellation, debt jubilee. I think that out of all the pieces of sacred economics, the most relevant right now would be debt jubilee, some form of cancellation, because the current structure of society is basically maintained through debt. And as David Graeber says, behind the man with the ledger, there's always the man with the gun. That's how the current social order is enforced.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine what life would be for tens of millions of people in this country if student loans were canceled, if credit card debt was canceled, if you had a clean slate. And then on top of that, so I could say a bit about gift economy too, but really I would go to the basic impulse underneath gift economy, which is the understanding that I'm not just here to survive, but I have something to give to the world that's important to me, that's beautiful to me, that is a contribution to something beyond myself. The current economic system forecloses that possibility for many people because it casts them into these dead-end jobs that they have to do just to make a living. And now we're seeing, maybe some of those jobs didn't have to get done. Maybe we could get by without a lot of the functions that have been normal before. And it says, what are we going to do with all of this human creativity and these gifts that we have, if it's not going to be to keep the machine running as normal? I'm not going to answer that question. What should we do with our labor and creativity? But I think it's the right question. It's the right question to begin asking from this choice point that we have, from the sovereignty. What world do we want to create right now?
You know, I hear you speak, and I feel everything resonates with me. I'm looking at some of the comments right now, and I think people are excited and hopeful, but there's some people who are a little bit more pessimistic about the nature of humanity. I actually think that the way you approach it, the way we each as individuals approach it, it will boil down to whether or not we believe that humans are essentially, some people think evil, selfish, greedy, or essentially good and more cooperative and less competitive. And then some of us who feel like myself, is we have a balance of cooperation and competition in us. You spoke earlier about the enemy within. Do you not think that human beings are hardwired, though, to have an enemy? Like, is that just a part of our brain, or do you think that maybe this is the time that this initiation is allowing us to actually transcend and become another kind of species? Because for as long as I've studied history, I always felt like there was an enemy within.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I noticed a comment pop up on the screen too. I'll just mention before I respond. Someone said, I don't trust the government very much anymore. And I'm like, yeah, it's about time that we stopped trusting the government and trusting authority in general.
Yeah.
Not that they're always wrong. Sometimes they might be right, but they've been deceiving us and holding us in a much smaller, uglier world for a long time than we could be living in. So as for human nature, I think that we have within human nature every possible, everything that you said, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what comes out depends on our conditions. So if somebody is, a violent, evil person, you might ask, what are the conditions that they are responding to, their life history? I heard a story once. Someone told me that they were living in a dangerous area in Philadelphia. Hope I don't take too much time with the story.
Wait, what part of Philly?
Hey, Philly.
Yeah,
my hometown.
So, he's broke basically. He's living in this cheap apartment. He's going to the bar, having a good time. Closing, it's 2:00. The buses have stopped. He has no way to go home except he has to walk down this long road in a pretty dangerous area. And he's like, oh man, I got to walk home. And there's a car parked by the side of the road. And the engine's running, there's someone in it. So he knocks on the window. Hey man, you mind giving me a ride? You're pointed in the right direction, just right down there. And the guy's, sure, come on, get in the car. So he pulls out, starts driving, pulls out a handgun, points it at the guy's head and says, I'm not going to take you home. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take you to wherever and I'm going to blow your fucking brains out. And I've done it before. And he's getting himself worked up. And the guy's scared. He's like, man, what, should I fight him? Maybe go for the gun? Maybe I could have at least a chance. He's going to do it. And then the radio's on and the doors come on. Break on through to the other side.
Other side.
And then the guy who's got the gun pointed to his head feels this tremendous calm, this peacefulness come over him. And he says, hey, you mind turning up that song? I like that song. So what can he do? You can't say no to a request like that. So he turns it up. And then a couple minutes later, he said, the passenger says, I'm really curious to hear your story and why you want to blow my brains out. Do you mind pulling over and telling me the story? And you can kill me after you tell the story. Not trying to get out of it or anything, but I really am curious. So he pulls over and he just starts telling him his story all night about how his father chained him to the bed and beat him with a baseball bat, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy's like, man, if that happened to me, I'd want to kill somebody too. And then he said, well, I don't want to kill you anymore, but I'd like to hang out again. So, they made plans to meet again.
For the record, Philadelphia typically doesn't have this level of
That's a very unique.
That hasn't happened to you, bro?
So, for me, what the story says, for one thing, there's a reason. Whoever we judge, whoever we hate, whoever we write off, whoever we dehumanize, there's a reason why they are the way they are. And once you accept that, instead of fighting them, if you think they're just evil, they're just bad, then the only response possible is to fight. But if you believe that there's some circumstance, then maybe you still have to fight, but maybe you can change the circumstance. This man changed the circumstance by asking him to tell your story. That's a very human thing to do. In order to really be curious about another person's story, you have to see them as a full human being. It's an act of respect. So to respect somebody is to create an invitation for them to rise to the level of your respect. So what is human nature? It's different parts of human nature come out in different circumstances. If you are in circumstances where you're seeing generosity all around you, it's going to make you be generous too. But if you're seeing selfishness all around you, then it'll bring out your own selfishness. So for me, the question isn't what is human nature so much as how can we create conditions for the best of human nature to come out and infect all of us?
My question is, and this is based off of one of the comments that I saw in there as well, where they basically said, if we as a people, we come together and we decide, the future that we want to have, that we do not want to be isolated from each other, that we do want to come together. But of course, we also want to be healthy. How do we get to the point where it's basically people versus policy? Have we already relinquished so much of our power? And as you can see, even right now, where they, it wasn't our choice to say, hey, everyone go home. People lost millions of jobs, and it wasn't by choice, if that makes sense. Do you feel like we've relinquished, I guess, too much power? Is this going to add to that reset? Will this hopefully wake people up to realize that we need that power back? Because you do speak to that. You speak to very specifically saying, do you want the government to continue to have this type of control over you? as we move forward?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that we don't live in very much of a democracy anymore. You know, we're every 4 years we're offered, you know, some boxes that we can check. You know, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. That's not actually democracy. That's not that there's no difference between the candidates, but the range of difference is so small. Selecting from a menu is not like being the chef. Real democracy, you know, we're participating in the creation of the menu. It's obvious that we don't have any kind of real democracy. I mean, like just take universal basic health care, which the big majority of Americans support, yet the politicians never do it. And they say, oh, that would be politically impossible. Why is it politically impossible when in a supposed democracy, the majority of people support it? I mean, that's just one example. It's obvious. Everybody listening to this knows that we, the people, have lost most of our sovereignty. And yeah, we're going to have to take action to recover that. Otherwise, how could we ever expect anything to be different unless we go begging to teacher, please change the rules? That's school is training for authoritarianism, actually, where you march through a curriculum created by somebody else. And one thing that's happening today is that school is being disbanded. People are homeschooling now, and they're realizing, you know, my kids are happy, even if they don't have playmates. I mean, imagine, it just opens up the field of imagination. Should we even take for granted school as we've known it? What if the people created the schools? What if you had 1,000 different models of schooling? What if you had 1,000 different models of healthcare? I mean, this is another thing, this question, this comment, you know, safety versus living fully. The standard narrative of health includes the realm of alternative and holistic modalities, traditional modalities, all these different ways to stay healthy that you know, conventional virology is not really aware of. So it actually isn't a choice that we're going to have to sacrifice our health in order to have hugs and handshakes again. It's that we have to embrace a totally different paradigm of what health is and how to achieve it.
It's interesting because yesterday I found out that in New York, which is the largest public school system in the country, they just, because of homeschooling, they just got rid of the Regents exam that we used to teach, Nana. There's no standardized, they don't have to do the standardized test.
Wow,
so
really?
Teachers can now literally teach anything as long as it's within the subject matter and teach in any way. And so this is an example, Charles, about to where I think there was a paradigm shift in the public school system. They realized that it wasn't going to work to teach this towards this standardized test. So I do see that we're now opening to new options that we just did not know were. Well, we knew maybe we're here, but this has forced the door open.
Yeah, and I don't know like what the solution should be or what model of education is the best or anything like that. All I know is that this is the question to ask right now. Now that we have this moment of pause, this moment to take a step back and ask, since we're not compelled by our routines right now, like we have this pause, we can say, what do we really want? What do we want to create? This is such a gift, this moment, even if it's coming with a lot of hardship. You know, I'm aware that like I'm doing okay, but I'm thinking every day about the hotel maids and the Uber drivers, you know, and people who are barely making it anyway. And this is another thing that it's bringing up. The choice, the new road is, how do we take care of everybody? It's bringing that to many people's awareness. what about the prisoners? What about the homeless? Like these people that were just on the margins of normality. There's a bigger awareness now of that we have to take care of everybody. Direction that we can go.
Amazing. Well,
I think
I don't know if we got a lag there,
I think that yeah, sorry, it's lagging on your side. But I'm staying in downtown LA, and so I'm next to Skid Row right now. So every day I'm walking by homeless people who have no masks, who they don't give a fuck about social distancing right now. But their tents are set up, and a lot of people. There's some people really struggling, but there was one block where it looked like they were having the best time that I've probably seen ever, like during this quarantine, other than D Nice's party. You know what I'm saying? Like they were chilling, dancing. They had music playing because nobody gives a fuck about them. So they're free. It's like cops aren't harassing them. No one wants to touch them. Like so it's like at this time they're having the opposite of what the rest of the world is. So it was a complete mindfuck and twist for me to see. But I do think that just that scene kind of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about, where it's a flip of values. They've chosen to live a certain way, or some were forced there, but right now, at least that block chose community over isolation. If somebody told them you guys should spread out your tents, they're like, nah, fuck no. This is how we live. They had autonomy, and they, oddly enough, were a symbol of what you call the sovereign being. You know what I'm saying?
I love that image. I'm going to take that with me. I've been hearing things from other countries, like less developed parts of the world, where people don't really believe it, and they're resisting the quarantines, and for some reason their death rates aren't any higher, and in fact a lot lower than places that are under lockdown. So I think that we don't really understand what's happening, even on an epidemiological level. And maybe I'll end with that. We need to wrap up, so I'll end with, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think much is being exposed, and I think a lot of what your essay spoke to, and thank you so much for joining us. I think it was a lot of embracing the unknown, but not allowing it to not allowing the fear of it to keep you from thinking and having foresight for where we need to go and how we need to move going forward. And I think that was a very interesting way of looking at, I think, just life in general, of not being aware of the unknown, but not allowing it to control you, not being so fearful that it takes away the very essence of who we are as, I guess, as human beings. So, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Yeah. Thank you all for being such for being game and for being such good interviewers, and I really enjoyed it myself.
Appreciate that, Charles.
We appreciate it, man.
Thank you, bro. And thank you for having the courage too to speak and write about what you spoke about.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Peace.
All right, bro.
Wow. Yeah. I felt like we was just in the loft in LA, all three of us.
Oh, absolutely.
And we got to smoke, sit back, and listen to a sage, like a guy we just met at the bar across the street we used to go to.
Yeah.
Comes in and just flips our mind, and we just like, oh shit, man. Wow, man, that shit. Like he gave us a lot to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the way he did it too. In the sense of, he wasn't super declarative about anything. Right? It was like admitting that, he doesn't know much. We don't know what's going on. But what I take away from that is the idea of how do we provoke thought in this moment? How do we actually approach things, with a new perspective? How do we utilize this time to question, our old ways of being and form new ways of thinking? You know what I mean? In order to kind of spark like a paradigm shift. But I like that he did it in a way where it's not like I'm telling you. I'm telling you this, I'm telling you that. And there's a moment for that too. Sometimes it's super just diplomatically walk the line, you're off the out there, where do you stand? But I appreciate the idea of it being able to, at least provoke thought.
You know what I saw in him is a security in amidst uncertainty.
Absolutely.
That's actually the thing that drives everything that he speaks. Right? And most humans are not prepared to do that. That's a certain skill you have to train your mind to do. There's
actually a book that's specifically about that I remember reading. It's called The Wisdom of Insecurity. Right? It's the idea of like when you're at your most vulnerable state, right? When you can't tell up from down, and you don't know whether or not you're going to sink, drown, swim. It's the idea of where's the wisdom to be found in these moments. But absolutely. I think this moment is the perfect manifestation of that concept. Absolutely. Man, that was great.
Yeah,
I will say this. I think that it's important to also, and I think he actually did this really well in the article, to allow room for nuance, right? Like when I look at, government, and I look at, some of the idea of the economy or the idea of education in these different agencies, there already is a lot of nuance. It's just that not a lot of ideas are actually being heard in the mainstream, right? I mean, even as far as, this debt forgiveness idea, Ilhan Omar, I think it was last week, she introduced a bill that would forgive, basically I would actually seize rent and mortgage payments for a year, right? And so point being that I think, a lot of these, when, it's like when people talk about labels, everyone's like, yeah, labels this, labels that, but the idea that labels are automated with people. And there are some people that actually have, interesting approaches. There are some models within education, where people actually are democratizing learning. I think we're actually familiar with those spaces, right? I think a lot of the different places that we've worked. And I think right now what needs to happen is like, pass the fucking mic. Let other motherfuckers be heard. Let other motherfuckers with interesting models be like, you know what? That is amazing. You have me to click on that shit.
Not only
hands down.
Donna turn into a robot, or was that just me?
It was
Yeah. Are you
We missed that. We missed the ribbon.
The ribbon was that there's a lot of amazing ideas that are actually already out there. And it's like, pass the fucking mic. Allow other people to actually realize this moment to get off, some of these other ways of thinking about old issues. Anyway.
Well, y'all, it looks like we are at the end of today's episode. Let's give the people a little bit of a preview for next week.
Clearly, I can't.
Hold on, let's be specific, Yuli. Let's be specific, Yuli. You listened this week.
I read, and then I listened.
Okay.
Maybe beside you. Like genius. Listen. Yeah. Good luck with it. You know what I'm saying? I'll get a friend that can maybe read it to you over FaceTime or something. So next week we have the Great Law of Peace, which was the Constitution of the Iroquois Nation. This was a constitution that contributed actually to the U.S. Constitution and other constitutions. So we have a great guest that we'll announce right before the show, and we hope that you all read or listen like Yui. And if any of y'all want to DM Yui with your Instagram tag and read to him, he's very open to that, for sure. And we will catch y'all next week, every single week, right here on the Lit Review. It's live Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. PST. And if you are not in the US, you can figure that out. Just Google it. Google it. Well, peace and cheers, everybody.
All right, a blessing.